The version of you that emerges when everything finally goes silent. Buddhist wisdom. The alarm doesn't ring. The phone stays dark. The neighbor's dog, for once, doesn't bark. In that gap, something ancient opens its eyes. Not the you that answers emails. Not the you that performs at dinner tables. Not the you that scrolls through other people's curated lives at 2 a.m. Someone else. Someone who is waiting beneath the static. Someone who knows things your speaking mouth has forgotten. This is not about meditation retreats or mountain monasteries. This is about the version of you that surfaces when the world's volume finally drops to zero. And what that version knows could rewrite every decision you're about to make. The city never stops talking. Sirens compose their urgent symphonies. Construction sites hammer their industrial poetry. Screens whisper their algorithmic seductions. Even your own mind, that relentless commentator, narrates your life as if silence were death itself. You've learned to mistake this noise for aliveness. You've confused the constant chatter for proof of existence. But Buddhist wisdom holds a different truth. In the gaps between thoughts, in the pause between breaths, in the moment before you reach for distraction, there lives a you that the world has never met. A you that doesn't need validation. A you that doesn't perform. A you that simply is, vast and quiet as an empty cathedral at dawn. The common enemy here has 1,000 faces, but one name. The addiction to stimulation. The terror of being alone with what you actually are. That terror builds walls of sound around you, fortresses of busyness, moats filled with notifications. And behind those walls, the truest part of you sits in exile, waiting for the siege to lift. Here's what happens in the body when silence first arrives. The nervous system, trained for decades to scan for threats and rewards, panics. The mind, that master storyteller, suddenly has no script. The hands reach for phantom devices. The throat tightens around words that have nowhere to go. This is not peace. This is withdrawal. And most people, feeling that discomfort, that existential itch, turn the volume back up within seconds. But those who stay, those who breathe through the first wave of discomfort, discover something extraordinary. The panic isn't a warning, it's a gate. And on the other side of that gate stands the version of you the noise has been drowning out. In the Zen tradition, they speak of original face. The face you had before your parents were born. Not a face made of skin and bone, but the raw awareness beneath all identities. Before you learned your name, before you accumulated your wounds, before you built your armor of opinions and preferences and carefully curated self. That original face, that primal you, exists only in silence. Think of a snow globe. When shaken, the water clouds with glitter, obscuring what's inside. Your daily life is that constant shaking. Work, relationships, news cycles, social hierarchies, desires, regrets. The glitter never settles, but in silence, profound silence, the water clears. And you see what was there all along. Not emptiness, not boredom, but clarity so sharp it cuts through every story you've told yourself about who you are. The urban monk knows this. She walks through the same loud streets you do. She hears the same sirens, but she carries an inner monastery, a portable silence. Between the honking taxi and the shouted argument, she finds a pocket of quiet, vast enough to breathe in. And in that breath, she touches the version of herself that doesn't react. That doesn't need, that simply witnesses. This is not transcendence in the mystical sense. This is coming home to the body, to the breath, to the exact temperature of the air on your skin, to the weight of your skeleton against the chair. When everything goes silent, you realize you've been living in your head, that echo chamber of judgment and memory, while your actual life, your sensory life, your breathing alive right now life, has been happening unattended. Silence reveals this. Silence says, you are not your thoughts. Thoughts are weather passing through the sky of your awareness. You are the sky. But the world doesn't want you to know this. The world profits from your distraction. Entire economies depend on keeping you fragmented, hungry, reaching. If you discovered the version of you that needs nothing, that is already complete, the machinery of desire would grind to a halt. This is why silence is revolutionary. This is why sitting still and doing nothing threatens the systems that require your constant motion. In the Buddhist canon, there's a story of a monk who sits beneath a tree until he becomes indistinguishable from the tree itself. Birds nest in his hair, vines climb his arms, seasons turn. And in that radical stillness, he sees through the illusion of separation. He realizes that the boundary between self and world is a line drawn in water. The silence doesn't erase him. It reveals him as part of everything. You don't need to sit for 40 days. You need 5 minutes where you stop running. 5 minutes where you don't check, don't respond, don't consume, don't produce. 5 minutes of radical doing nothing. And in that space, something stirs. Not thoughts, not feelings exactly, but a quality of attention, pure, impersonal, kind. This is the beginning of meeting yourself. The version of you that emerges in silence doesn't have opinions about everything, doesn't need to be right, doesn't keep score. This version looks at your life with curious detachment, like an anthropologist studying a fascinating culture. It sees your patterns without condemning them, your fears without inflating them, your desires without being enslaved by them. This version knows something your noisy self has forgotten, that 90% of your suffering comes from the stories you tell about your suffering, not the suffering itself. Pain is inevitable. The narrative around pain, the drama, the identity, the endless mental litigation, that's optional. And silence strips away the optional, leaving only what is. Imagine your mind as a classroom with 30 students all shouting at once. The teacher, exhausted, has given up on order. That's your daily consciousness. Now imagine the bell rings. The students file out. The teacher sits at her desk in the empty room. The chalk dust settles. Light slants through the windows. In that emptiness, she remembers why she became a teacher. Not to control the noise, but to create space for learning. Your true self is that teacher, and silence is the bell. The practice is simple, radical in its simplicity. You sit, you follow the breath, the mind wanders, you notice, you return. The mind wanders, you notice, you return. 10,000 times, no judgment, no failure. Just the endless patient return to now, to breathe, to body, to the silence underneath the noise. And here's what starts to happen. The thoughts that seem so urgent, so vital, begin to reveal themselves as repetitive, the same worry recycled, the same fantasy rerun, the same argument rehearsed. You've been listening to a broken record, mistaking it for wisdom. In silence, you hear the scratch in the vinyl. You realize you've been taking orders from a glitch. This doesn't make you cold. It makes you free. Free to respond instead of react. Free to choose which thoughts deserve your attention and which can pass like clouds. Free to live from the stable ground of awareness instead of the shifting sands of emotion. The Tibetans have a practice called sky gazing. You lie on your back. You stare at the sky. No agenda, no technique, just you and the vastness. Thoughts arise, clouds pass, birds cross. The sky remains unchanged. After an hour, something shifts. You realize the sky is not separate from you. Your awareness is that sky, spacious, untroubled, capable of holding everything without being diminished by anything. This is who you are when the noise stops. Not a small, frightened self trying to control an overwhelming world, but the space in which the world appears, the silence in which all sounds occur, the stillness in which all movement happens. But let's be honest, silence is terrifying at first, because in silence, you meet what you've been running from, the grief you've been postponing, the anger you've been swallowing, the loneliness you've been medicating with busyness. Silence doesn't judge these things. It simply makes room for them. And when you stop running, when you turn and face what's been chasing you, you discover it's not a monster. It's a child, your own hurt self, asking to be seen. Compassion is born in silence. Not the sentimental kind, but the fierce kind. The kind that sees clearly and acts wisely. When you're not caught in the spin cycle of your own drama, you can see others with fresh eyes. You see their pain, their confusion, their desperate attempts to matter. And instead of judgment, something softer arises. Not pity, not superiority, but recognition. We're all doing our best with the consciousness we have access to. The version of you that emerges in silence is not enlightened in some distant spiritual sense. It's simply awake. Awake to the present moment instead of lost in the past or future. Awake to the body instead of imprisoned in the head. Awake to the vast, ordinary miracle of being alive right now. Breathing in and out, surrounded by a world that is mostly kind, mostly beautiful, if you stop long enough to notice. There's a practice you can do right now. Wherever you are, stop reading for 10 seconds. Listen, not for anything in particular. Just listen to the soundscape around you. The hum of electricity, the distant traffic, the rhythm of your own breathing. In those 10 seconds, you touch the silence beneath the sound. You meet the version of yourself that is always here, always, now, always home. The urban mystics know this secret. They've learned to find cathedrals in subway cars, monasteries in coffee shops, meditation halls in crowded elevators. They don't need perfect conditions. They need only the willingness to drop into silence for one breath. One moment of not doing. One instant of pure presence. And in that instant, they touch eternity. This is not escape. This is the opposite of escape. This is arrival. You've been escaping your whole life into noise, into distraction, into the endless tasks and missions and dramas. Silence is where you finally stop fleeing, where you plant your feet and say, here, now, this, enough. The paradox is this. In silence, you discover you are vast. In stillness, you discover you are powerful. In doing nothing, you discover everything that matters. The world tells you the opposite. The world says be more, do more, have more, achieve more. The world is terrified of your sufficiency. Because sufficient people don't consume desperately, don't compete desperately, don't validate desperately. Buddhist wisdom doesn't promise you a better future. It offers you this moment unadorned, this breath unimproved, this life exactly as it is, revealed to be enough. Not because you've achieved something, but because achievement was never the point. Presence was the point. Awareness was the point. The simple, stunning fact of being alive was the point all along. When you sit in silence long enough, something remarkable happens. The boundaries soften. You're not sure where your body ends and the chair begins, where the sound of your breath ends and the sound of the wind begins. You're not dissolving. You're recognizing what was always true. That separation is a useful fiction. That underneath the skin, underneath the name, underneath the story, there's just this. Awareness, being, presence. Call it what you want. It doesn't need a name. This is the version of you the noise was protecting you from. Because This version doesn't play the games, doesn't climb the ladders, doesn't hunger for what can't satisfy. This version is free, and freedom is dangerous. To economies, to hierarchies, to any system that depends on your lack. The city at 3 a.m. reveals this. When the traffic dies, when the lights dim, when the performers rest, what's left is the city's true face. Raw, honest, vulnerable. You, in silence, discover the same. The performance ends. The mask comes off. And what remains is softer than you expected, stronger than you feared, more real than anything you've been pretending to be. There's a Zen saying, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The tasks don't change. You change. Or more accurately, you stop pretending to be someone who needs changing. You see through the game of self-improvement. Not because you've arrived at perfection, but because you've seen that perfection is another trap. Another way to avoid being here, flawed and alive and utterly human. The version of you that emerges in silence doesn't have all the answers, doesn't claim to, doesn't need to. This version lives the questions, sits with the uncertainty, makes peace with not knowing, and from that not knowing, acts anyway. Not from fear or ambition or the need to prove something, but from a quiet clarity, a sense of what serves, what matters, what's true. In the monastery, they ring bells to mark the transitions between activities, not to rush you, but to wake you up. Each bell a small reminder. You're alive. You're here. Don't miss this. In your life, you can create your own bells. Thresholds where you pause. 3 conscious breaths before checking your phone. 1 moment of stillness before entering your home. A beat of silence before speaking. These tiny interruptions in the momentum of habit create cracks where the light gets in. And the light that gets in is nothing mysterious. It's simply awareness. Unconditioned awareness. The you that existed before you learned to perform. The you that will remain when the performance exhausts itself. The you that is reading these words right now, behind the reading, beneath the understanding, prior to agreement or disagreement. That witnessing presence. That's who you are when everything goes silent. The world will test this. The noise will return. Louder than before. Like an offended God demanding worship, and you'll forget. You'll get swept up again in the urgency, the drama, the endless solving of problems, that solving creates more problems. This is not failure. This is being human. The practice is not to transcend humanity. The practice is to be human with more consciousness. To catch yourself mid-storm and remember, there's a you that watches storms. That isn't diminished by them. You've spent years building an identity, layer upon layer. Achievements, wounds, opinions, roles, masks, armor. The person you show at work, the person you show at home, the person you show online, each one a performance, exhausting to maintain. Silence invites you to set them all down for a moment. Not to destroy them, but to remember their costumes. And underneath, there's a naked awareness that doesn't need costumes to exist. This naked awareness is not separate from your humanness. It doesn't hover above your life judging it. It lives inside your laughter, your tears, your confusion, your joy. It's intimate with everything. Nothing is excluded. The difference is, it's not identified. It experiences emotion without becoming the emotion. It thinks thoughts without believing it is the thoughts. It lives life without confusing itself with the role. The Sufis call this state fana, annihilation, not of the self, but of the false self, the constructed self, the self that needs constant reinforcement from the outside world. When that self dissolves in silence, what's left isn't nothing. What's left is everything. The whole universe pouring through the space where the ego used to stand guard. You don't need to believe any of this. Belief is just more noise. You need only to try. 5 minutes, tomorrow morning, before you reach for the phone, before you start solving, before you begin performing. 5 minutes of sitting, breathing, allowing, not controlling, not improving, not even meditating in the formal sense, just being, stupidly, gloriously, completely present. And in that 5 minutes, notice. Notice the urge to do something else. Notice the itching mind. Notice the body's complaints. Notice the thoughts that try to narrate this experience. Notice the awareness that notices. That's the doorway. That noticing, that's the you beneath the you. The version that doesn't need silence to exist, but that silence allows you to meet. Over time, with practice, this version becomes more accessible. You learn to drop into it in a single breath, in the middle of meetings, in the chaos of family dinners, in the heat of arguments. A quick return to the silence underneath. And from that place, you respond differently, not from wound, not from habit, but from the spacious calm of someone who remembers what they actually are. What you actually are is not a problem to be solved, not a project to be completed, not a brand to be optimized. You're a temporary, localized expression of the same awareness that looks out from every pair of eyes, the same consciousness that breathes in every lung, the same presence that witnesses every experience. Call it Buddha nature, call it the eternal now, call it nothing at all. The label doesn't matter. The recognition does. This recognition doesn't make you special. It makes you ordinary. Beautifully, devastatingly ordinary. Part of the fabric. Not separate, not superior. Just another wave briefly rising from the ocean, catching light, then folding back into the depths. And in that ordinariness, there's a peace that transcendence could never provide. The city continues its noise. The world continues its demands. But you, for a moment, for 5 minutes, for a breath, remember, you are the silence in which the noise occurs, the stillness in which movement dances, the space in which experience unfolds. And that changes everything while changing nothing. Walk through your day differently now, not trying to manufacture silence, but recognizing it. In the pause between words, in the gap between thoughts, in the moment before reaction, it's always here. You've just been too noisy to notice, too busy becoming to remember you already are. The version of you that emerges when everything finally goes silent isn't a better you, isn't a fixed you, isn't even a different you. It's the you that was here before the noise began, patient, vast, untroubled, waiting for nothing because it lacks nothing. This version doesn't need your belief, doesn't need your understanding. It simply is, and it's closer than your next breath. So breathe. Let the words end. Let the teaching dissolve. And in the space that remains, meet yourself. Not the story, not the role, not the wound or the achievement, but the aware presence reading these words, the consciousness lighting up this moment, the vast ordinary miracle of being here, now, alive. That's who you are when everything goes silent. And that's who you've always been underneath the noise. Welcome home. If this teaching serves you, share it with someone who needs to remember. And join us here in this practice of living awake in the city, where every moment offers a doorway back to silence, back to presence, back to the version of you that the world has been waiting to meet.